All right, so that wraps up this section. I do want to make you guys aware of something, though. There's a feature that's coming, maybe, hopefully, to JavaScript at some point in the future that you should be on the lookout for, because you'll notice that there are actually libraries that are starting to write documentation in terms of this feature. But before I talk about this feature, let's take a step back and talk about how features actually get into JavaScript. So JavaScript is an implementation of the ECMA script standard. So ECMA script is the specification for JavaScript. ECMA script or ES script determines what features make it into JavaScript. And so that's why we have things like ES 2015, and we'll have ES 2016 this year, and so on. And basically, the ECMA Corporation, they have a technical committee inside of it that has members, such as all the major browser vendors, other people like Facebook and Netflix, and other big players in the industry who are on this committee, and they submit features and they talk about what features should be included and so on. And the features come in different stages. We have stage 0 through stage 4, and you can actually go to a GitHub to see what features are coming and what stage they're. It's over here in GitHub TC39, which is the Technical Committee 39, and then ECMA 262. ECMA 262 is the number for ECMA script. And if we come down here, we can see all the features and what stages they're on, what things that we can start to expect to appear in the ECMA script specification as the years progress, as they get through the stages. And as you see, we have stages, in this case, 1 through 4, and we also have stage 0. So 4 is basically, it's finished. 3 is they can still do bug fixes. 2, they've drafted the specification and are pretty happy with it. And 1 is a formal proposal for a feature. So all of these features, anything from 2 on, you'll probably see end up in the specification one of these years. They are now releasing a new ECMA script specification every year, which is why ES6, if you've ever seen ES6 thrown around, or ECMA script 6 was renamed to ECMA script 2015, because they're now naming this specification based off of the year that it was finally approved. But if you come down here and you go to stage 0 proposals, you'll get a list of all the things that have kind of been, people had a great idea for something to be added into JavaScript, and they kind of threw it at the technical committee, but they haven't yet accepted it as a formal proposal. And one of these guys is actually really cool. It's the function bind syntax. And I want to show you guys the function bind syntax, because you're already starting to see there's one library in particular that's starting to plan for the existence of this feature, and it's a fantastic feature, and it makes working with bind and call and all that stuff a lot easier. Now, this feature does not exist in any browser right now. Obviously, it's a stage 0 proposal. It's not even been approved by the technical committee. But what we can do is we can use a transpiler such as Babel to take code that would use this feature and turn it into code that can be ran on our browsers. Now, in order to do this, you must make sure stage 0 is enabled. Otherwise, it's not going to be available. So let's start off with a basic example. If we do var array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can do array.forEach, but remember, if I did array.forEach console log, what happens and why does it happen? Well, what happens is console.log, this function gets passed into for each, but it loses its context. So we would have to do console log.bind console for this code to work. And now we see the output is working. Now, this proposal will allow us to do something like this. For each : console log. So we see we get the same output here. But more interesting, what we see here is basically Babel turned the new syntax into basically how we would do it the old way, with this weird context equals console thing, but that's just an artifact of how it was compiled. And so it really allows us to remove repetition from bind statements. So I can say var log equals : console log, and I can do log hello, right? And that'll properly bind and everything is awesome. So let's go ahead and comment this out, because there's another thing we can use this with. We can use it for method stealing. Like, for example, let's say I have a function called print name. And print name says console log my name is plus this dot name. And now if I did print name, what are we going to get? We're going to get an error. Now, we get an error here as opposed to an empty string like we did earlier because we're in strict mode. But the point is that print name is referencing a this, but we're not binding this to anything. Let's say we wanted to invoke print name on an object. So var person equals name is Nelson. Let's say we wanted to invoke print name in the context of person. How would we normally do that? Well, we would say print name dot call person, right? And that's how we would traditionally do it. The new syntax will allow us to do person : print name and then parentheses. And notice how that turns into a call statement right there. So it allows us to, as opposed to doing the print name call person, which is a little, I don't like that because the function's on the left, the context is on the right. But with this syntax, the context is on the left, the function's on the right, and it's a much more natural syntax. And the binding syntax is also nice because doing console.log.bind.console gets very, very, very tiring. We have console written twice where it doesn't need to be. And using that binding syntax allows us to get rid of that. So I just wanted to show you guys the syntax and show you guys it'll hopefully be included. I think it's a great bit of syntax, a great addition to JavaScript, and it makes working with call and apply and bind a lot easier in certain circumstances. Another thing that'll allow us to do is it'll allow us to import just functions that we need from a library and nothing else, and then use this syntax to bind those functions to objects at the call site so that we don't have to import a monolithic library and we just have to import the individual functions we need, which will reduce file size. And that's what Reactive Extensions version 5 is going to kind of start recommend people start doing when the syntax, especially when the syntax is brought up the pipeline. So, to recap this section, what was the whole point of this section? The whole point of this section was the this keyword. What is the this keyword? The this keyword is your execution context. It is an object that contains properties. How is the this keyword determined? Well, unlike lexical scoping or static scoping that JavaScript has, the this keyword is determined by how the function is called. What is on the left-hand side, as you see right here, what is on the left-hand side of a function invocation? We know this is a function invocation because we have an argument list, and that determines what the this keyword points to. So how do we change what the this keyword points to? Well, we see down here that we have examples of stealing functions, for example. We can steal functions, or we can use the call method, or we can use the apply method. And the difference between those two is the call method takes in a variable list of arguments, whereas the apply method takes in two arguments, one being the context, one being the list of arguments to apply. And then finally we have bind. And what does bind do? Bind overrides what the this keyword will be in an object. And if you, in certain circumstances, we can use the arrow functions. Arrow functions basically will take the this keyword from the parent scope and bring it down, pull it down into that function. Arrow functions also are significantly more clean, easy to read once you get used to the syntax than traditional function syntax. And with that, I think that about wraps up this, and we'll see you guys in the next section.